It's a pleasure and an honor to welcome Rajiv, who I consider both a friend and, of course, a colleague to the Washington, D.C. area. Rajiv is also, like many of you, a scientist, a computer scientist and a physicist, but 20 years ago decided to devote his life to the study of India, Indian civilization, and Indian spiritual traditions. He was, of course, a very successful entrepreneur prior to that, and I guess that success has sort of allowed you to spend the next sort of phase of your life in doing the work that you have. He's been an author and is a prolific writer. He blogs. He's very popular in the blogosphere, and Huffington Post and Pathos and First Post and State of Formation, and on it goes. So for those of you who haven't heard of him, you only have to Google his name to find out all about him. His most recent book, Being Different, the one that he's going to talk about today, is really sort of the distillation of his 20 years of study and serious scholarship. He also, by the way, happens to run his own foundation called the Infinity Foundation. Being Different essentially brings to the foreground the elements that make India and Indian civilization distinct from other parts of the world, but specifically the West. And in the book, it's interesting, it's fascinating. I read the manuscript a couple of years ago for the first time, and I was absolutely riveted because as an Indian, even though I've sort of grown up in India, born and raised in India, have lived in this country for quite a long time, I just felt that I had never heard or seen in writing what being Indian really means and articulate it as well as it is. And what was particularly interesting was sort of the comparison that Rajiv presents with the West, and sort of being bicultural and having lived here and being Indian American. That was of great interest to me. So Rajiv will certainly talk to you much more about the book. It is important to know that he's had, the book is already a bestseller. It's been out for 2 months, and it's a bestseller in India. It's in waves. But one of the audiences, a couple of the audiences that have been really interested in the book, which should interest this group here, is the technical scientist, the scientific community in India has found Being Different to be of great interest to what they do and to their knowledge of India. The business community has found it very interesting as well. And I'm sure many of you here sort of combine business with technology, and you will find, and Rajiv will talk about this a lot more, that in his book he sort of explains that there is a very distinct Indian way of doing business and of thinking through scientific issues. And I think this book is great, not just for Indians, but also for Westerners who are trying to know more about India. So with that, Rajiv, welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. I'm delighted to be here.
Okay.
I was hosted at IIT Madras in November. We had a session on this book, and a couple of professors came in, gave their comments and discussions, and a whole evening with student Q&A. And more recently, IIT Kharagpur, spent an evening there. I've also given talks at Indian Institute of Sciences in Bangalore. In terms of management, it was mentioned, management people are very interested. So there was a seminar at IIM Bangalore, and also there's an worldwide organization called the Young Presidents Organization, YPO. These are presidents of a company before the age of 40, and they have chapters all over. And the YPO of Chennai hosted, and then the YPO of Calcutta hosted. So I've been around, and in the recent trip I went to the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, which, as you know, is the brain trust of nuclear science and all that, and have a wonderful evening with scientists. I wasn't sure how interested they would be in matters of civilization and culture, but they were extremely interested, and it came out in the Q&A. they pulled more out during the Q&A than I was presenting myself. So since my background is as a scientist and then in the business world, and I decided to sort of go into a journey of self-discovery and self-exploration, not only about my own personal life, but also me as an Indian, and see what is distinct, who are we, and what do we bring to the world. That's important. So the primary audience of all my writings is actually myself. I'm trying to write to clarify my own ideas, and then the sharing with other people became a kind of a natural offshoot. Started with presentations and blogs, and then people started wanting more articles and books, and so books started coming, and that's how I ended up here. I didn't leave the business world with the thought that I'm going to become a writer, but it sort of evolved that way. Now my theme has always been, in this 20 years, has been the things about India, its civilization, its history, its spirituality, its culture, those sort of things. And I found a whole lot of ignorance, misunderstanding, misinterpretation in the US school systems. One of the books there, called Invading the Sacred, was a book about distortions and stereotypes, basically stereotypes in the school system. A lot of it unintended, just out of ignorance, because that's how during the colonial era we were typecast. And then I've written more books. The most recent one, which is what I want to talk about, Being Different, is about the question, what is there about the Indian mind and the Indian tradition which is sufficient, which is radically different from the Western worldview. Now there is a term I use called Western universalism, which means that the West's idea of history, philosophy, science, values, because of the West's power, became universal. So the education system, which spread into places like India, being Western influenced, people there started thinking that this is the universal gold standard. And so people in the former colonies like India evaluate their own culture against the West as the gold standard. And they sort of aren't sufficiently educated or aware of their own civilization to be able to reverse the process and say, okay, according to our gold standard, how are they? So there's some interesting things that are worth talking about in that regard. China is contesting Western universalism. China has come up with the idea of Confucian thought and Confucian universalism. Confucian universalism is a term they've coined, Confucian ethics, Confucian modernity, and what they mean is that we are becoming modern, but that doesn't mean we have to become Western. We can remain Chinese and follow our traditional philosophy of the Confucian way, and within the parameters of our Confucian way, we can also be as modern and scientific and technological as anybody else. So we intend to be number one in all these domains, but the Chinese-ness remains. And the Japanese never ceased to be Japanese, even though they came up with the best technology and science in so many ways. And you find that even in Europe, the French are very French. They are very distinct about what it means to be French, and don't like it if you mix them up with an Englishman or say it's all the same. They don't like that. And Russian is very clear about what's the history and the whole mindset of being a Russian. So the question keeps coming up, and a lot of business people want to ask me, as now they're going around the world cutting deals, they're finding out that when they do a deal involving a Chinese, he's very clear about his sense of identity. The Japanese is very clear, the French guy is very clear, the British guy is very clear. So who are we in terms of our civilizational identity? And the idea that we'll sort of melt and give up and surrender and sort of join Western universalism, we may think that that is the universalism, but all these other places I mentioned don't think so. They are very clear about their own distinctiveness. And distinctiveness is not necessarily superiority, it just means we're different. It just means that we're this way, and somebody else is some other way. It's not a question of superior or inferior, it's just a question of wanting to honor and respect one's own distinctiveness. Now, if you look at the history, one of the things I'm doing is my foundation has started a 20-volume series on history of Indian contributions to science and technology. Somebody called Joseph Needham did 30 volumes in Cambridge. He did 30 volumes on Chinese science and technology, and every university studying China looks at that as a reference work. Nobody had done something similar for India, so we decided we should do it. We have 9 volumes done, and we have a few more in the pipeline. If you look at the history of Indian science and technology, it's filled with a huge amount of pioneering work in things like metallurgy, steel, zinc distillation, which was pioneered in India, textiles, shipbuilding, water harvesting, civil engineering, on and on. There's several fields in which Indians did extremely well, and this is quite well documented. And you might be thinking that this phenomenon of Indian technocrats and highly skilled knowledge workers going to other countries is something recent, as if it's happened for the first time. But I'd like to tell you that this is also a very common trend in the early centuries. You see many Arab sources talking about Indian physicians in their hospitals, Indian astronomers, Indian knowledge workers. You see China importing a whole lot of Indian knowledge workers into China with great respect, bringing them as sort of distinguished thinkers. So the export of India, its knowledge workers, has been around for a very long time. The earliest records in Greece and Rome talk about importing Indian steel, a kind of steel called Wood's steel, W-O-O-T-Z steel, which was very tough, and that was used for making weapons and swords and shields because you couldn't pierce it. And it was sold like gold, it was very valuable, and only India had that technology. So you find quite a lot of export of knowledge workers and technology. A person in University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, where I'm on the chair of the governing board for the India Studies program, a person there who's a historian of Portugal went to find out more about the Portuguese trade in Goa. And he wanted to find out how did they make such a huge empire with a little colony there, why were they there, what were they doing. And he had the Indian government open up various old archives which nobody had bothered to read. And he found that the major item of trade was medicinal plants. So India, what has been classified as spices is actually medicinal plants. It's not that somebody is, taking some regular spice. You wouldn't build an empire out of that. But these were medicinal plants. And Portugal was importing this and re-exporting, supplying most of Europe. So Portugal was sort of the middleman, bringing these things and supplying most of Europe. You find that places like Nalanda University and 20 other universities in North India were like today's Harvard or MIT or Stanford. They were attracting the brightest of the brightest from all over Asia, not imposing or conquering or going there with an army to impose on them and put the Indian ideas on others, but actually people from other countries were soliciting this knowledge. The emperors in China were routinely sending the cream to places in India for higher knowledge. Southeast Asia, places like Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, were not only sending their smartest kids to learn, but also were endowing colleges and endowing programs in places like Nalanda because they were so appreciative of what they were getting in return. And though all the Nalanda University library was destroyed by invaders, the knowledge about Nalanda that we have today is reconstructed from foreign students' records. So you have Chinese foreign students who came and studied there for many years, and students from various countries, And when they went back in their own languages, they have written diaries which got published, which have been preserved. So so there's a multi-volume series on Nalanda, what was its curriculum, what was life like, who were the faculty, and that is reconstructed from foreign students' accounts. So this shows that India as a knowledge economy, which is a buzzword nowadays, knowledge economy, is not necessarily something very recent. It has been there for a while. And you find that the oldest city, known cities or complex of cities, the Harappan, Indus Valley, Saraswati civilization, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira is in Gujarat, is an amazing feat. And we've done a few volumes of that in our foundation and plan to do a few more. And the former Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, who passed away a few years ago, he was the editorial board of the series. He's the person who actually discovered Dholavira, which is the world's oldest port. And when you look at the civilization, it has over 2,000 settlements, 2,000 towns and villages, some big, some small, spread over an area half the size of Europe. So it's a very large place. And from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Punjab, Rajasthan, Gujarat kind of place, right up to Delhi. And this civilization lasts over 2,000 years. So you have a huge civilization scattered, lasting a very long time. And you see the technology of tiles, you see the technology of weights. They have binary weights. The weights are the ratio of 1:2:4:8 and so on. So binary weights. The length, width, height of the tiles also binary ratio. And yet there is no evidence that this was centrally administered and centrally controlled. It's very decentralized because you have a whole lot of towns which seem self-contained. It is not like in other civilizations like Mesopotamia or Egypt, where you have one big emperor's big fortress where the emperor lived, and then everybody else is living in tents. It's not like that. There is no one big fortress, first of all. So there is no huge center with a lot of power or a lot of wealth. It's all decentralized, one bedroom, two bedroom flats, like a middle class, like a very egalitarian middle class. So we keep hearing about our society being very hierarchical forever. But the physical evidence of archaeology from the Harappan civilization doesn't show that to be the case. When it happened, why it happened, we don't know. But certainly at that time, it seemed to be a very flat society with a whole lot of people more or less equal, with running water, drainage systems. Very interesting. So we are doing this kind of work to understand our civilization better. This also refutes a myth that Indians are mystical and otherworldly, and they neglect this world, and they're not materialistic, and they're all spiritual, and they're not interested in material welfare, because you don't find that. You find the medicine improving over time, the medicine practice. You find steel manufacturing improving over time. You find the cities becoming more sophisticated over time. So you find that the idea of advancement is definitely there, and the idea of looking after society's needs is definitely there. So while we have a great spiritual tradition also, it is not that there hasn't been a material civilization as well. So this is kind of interesting. And one of the reasons I wanted to embark on this very ambitious 20-volume project is to refute the claim that the Indian philosophy will require Westerners to come and rescue us and save us, because we will become kind of imbeciles and incapable of really helping ourselves in a material sense. If you look at his history until the colonial era, the history is quite prosperous in India in a material sense. The Cambridge history of world economics looks at all the civilizations and how they were doing at various points in time, and it says that until 1750 India was 24-25% of the world GDP, and China was about the same, a little higher. So more than 50% of the world GDP was India and China. And what is called the West which consists of Europe and United States, was less than 10% at that point in time. And 100 years later, the West became like 70-80% from less than 10. That's called the Industrial Revolution. And India went down to 3-4%. So there is a 100-year period of de-industrialization of India and the industrialization of Europe. It's a very interesting mathematical correlation. So while you read about the Industrial Revolution of England, it is always shown as some kind of a great event that they did it on their own, and they were somehow superior people, and they figured out all of this. And the role of the colonies in supplying the wealth, in supplying the technology, in supplying sometimes the labor, and being the market for finished goods is seldom mentioned. But actually, if you look at the 1800s records, the British made very concerted efforts to ban steel production in India, to really go and persecute people who were textile manufacturers when these technologies were being relocated and ramped up in the British Industrial Revolution. So when people talk about India as a developing economy, I prefer the term redeveloping, because redeveloping shows that it already had some advancement, it already had some prosperity, and there was a decline, and now it's trying to have a renaissance, come back. So whereas development makes it look like it was all sort of dark and primitive and tribal and backward, and now West is coming to civilize. So I think that linear theory of history, which is a Hegelian idea, that everybody goes through the same stages that the West went through, and the non-West is sort of backward. They are where the West used to be, and they have to, in order to bring them up, they have to copy the West to become like the West. So, and the West is always going to be ahead of them. I mean, that is just not true. If you look at the facts, that's just not true. So, some of the scientific claims are quite impressive from the Indian tradition. And I'm not referring to things that can't be proven. In our series, we don't include things like a claim that there was flying saucers in the Mahabharata or something, Pushpak Viman. Because when somebody asks me, I had a big fight with orthodox thinkers who say, okay, why aren't you including, aircraft which are mentioned in the Mahabharata? I tell them that I need physical evidence. I mean, you need to show me a plane or a wheel or a wing, or you need to show a landing strip, or you need to show me something. Because a scientist wants empirical proof. Just because someone wrote it, it could have been fiction, could have been imagination, could have been a proposal which nobody implemented. I mean, there's so many architectural proposals that never get implemented. So maybe it was somebody's wild imagination. But whether they really existed or not, you can't prove until you can show evidence. Then in Mahabharata, there's also talk about, people say there's talk about nuclear bombs. So I always tell them that, and I told this to people in Bhabha Atomic Research, because they're all nuclear scientists. I said, if there was a nuclear bomb, there would be a radioactive crater. So somebody has to take me to a place with a Geiger counter and say there was a nuclear bomb because there's a radioactive crater, and no one has shown us that. So I can't believe that. So I'm a very skeptical, scientific mind. I don't accept things just because it is nostalgia or chauvinistic, or I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I'm a pretty hard-nosed scientific mind. And applying that standard, I find some amazing contributions that withstand scientific scrutiny. For example, there is a Sanskrit text where it says this particular formula gives you the velocity of light. And that velocity of light is exceedingly accurate. It's not the most accurate as per today, but it is like 99% accurate. Now, how would somebody have any idea about the velocity of light? There is no evidence that there was a measuring instrument at that time. There's no evidence, no claim that they measured it. But how did somebody intuit, or where did he get this idea from? We don't know. But we cannot deny that there is such a thing. And similarly, the value of pi, very accurately written. So a whole lot of these calculations, these theories are verifiable today, but we do not understand how someone figured this out. At least as of now, we don't understand. There's a lot on the mathematics, infinite series, the idea of infinitesimal, things that are required prerequisites for calculus. A few hundred years before Descartes and Newton start using these things, mathematicians in Kerala and various other places in India are filled with volumes of this sort of thing. And Bodhanya's theorem predates the Pythagoras theorem by several centuries, and in fact is a more general theorem, of which the Pythagoras theorem is a special case. So if you look at all this, the question is, a question that comes up is, how did the Indian scientific mind make these discoveries? And one of the things I discuss in one of the chapters, I believe chapter 4, is is there an Indian way of science? And I raised this question at the Bhabha Atomic Research, and it generated a fantastic discussion during Q&A and later on over dinner. I was very fascinated by exploring these kind of ideas. Then another area of Indian knowledge which is seldom appreciated, because the only knowledge given credit is sort of spiritual, mystical knowledge, which is of course very profound, but another area which is practical is the whole area of value for society. People are generally not, when they study the Indian traditions, they are not studying Natashastra, which is the aesthetics, the theory of dance, the theory of arts, which is very sophisticated. Often people are not studying Kautilya, and the whole Arthashastra, which is several thousand years before, people like, the political scientists of the West, Machiavelli, a lot of people like Machiavelli, way before Europeans. Political thought, very practical thought. Theories of ethics, theories of statecraft and governance. The caring for elderly in the ashrama system, very deeply rooted ideas on looking after the elderly, your responsibility towards the elderly in society, your responsibility towards animals. Now we have animal rights in the West, but this is a very recent thing. But in India it's a very ancient system. And your responsibility towards Mother Nature. We have ecology and environmentalism, more so from a selfish point of view, because like if we dump pollutants into the water, the fish will go bad, it's bad for our economy, or if we pollute the atmosphere, it'll be bad for our health. It's not as if nature has her own rights, it's more like for our selfish needs, we better look after our asset. Nature is our asset, our property, and it's not that we are respecting nature as herself, we are really respecting it as our property, looking after for our own purpose. But in our traditions, nature has rights. Nature has rights, nature is a living entity, and you have an obligation of duties towards preserving and looking after nature. So the ethics are not only about myself, also about family, what in the West is called family values, also particular duties towards the elderly, towards society, towards animals, towards the whole cosmos. This is very interesting, this kind of a thing. And some of these ideas from India entered the West in the 1960s, when there were hippies and there was the New Age movement, and a lot of people going to India for answers. Then they brought back some of these ideas. The idea of the divine as feminine was an Indian idea brought into in the 60s and 70s into the West. So India has had an influence in what is now considered new Western thought. And sometimes, there's a book club which has just featured this book. Lively debates have started. And so some of the Westerners' critique of my book is that when you point out differences, you are ignoring that many Westerners have had similar thoughts. And then they name Whitehead, and they name Teilhard de Chardin, and I point out that every one of them actually studied India. Every one of them brought these ideas from India. So these ideas of Indian origin got recharacterized, reformulated. The original Sanskrit got dropped, and they got put into a Western framework and called Western thought. And so now you're using the Indian thought, Westernized, as your argument against me. So this is a very interesting discussion I'm also having. Today, the cutting edge of neuroscience and cognitive science in MIT labs, National Institute of Mental Health, people in Stanford, people in Harvard. A lot of that is based on the study of yogis and Tibetan meditators. This has been going on for 25 years because by studying the higher states of consciousness that these traditional systems are able to achieve, they are finding neurological phenomena which were previously not considered to be possible. So there's something called functional MRIs which allow you to do very, very sophisticated scans inside the brain and figure out how the system is shifting when the person is practicing some technique. So the unfortunate thing which I'm criticizing is that the Westerner who measures the yogi gets to claim credit as his discovery, not the yogi who can produce that. So the argument I give is it's like an athlete who runs a very fast 100 meters and the guy with the stopwatch gets a medal. That, and you call the athlete a subject, like a rat or something. The subject achieved this and I measured it, so I get a paper and I get a prize for it. So this is what's happening. Herb Benson in Harvard studied transcendental meditators in the 60s and 70s. And he wanted to take credit for discovery, so he called it the relaxation response rather than transcendental meditation. But all the people he was studying were transcendental meditators. He knows that, everybody knows that. And so he came up with a huge empire at Harvard, big grants he got, and he's celebrated as sort of the founding discoverer of this phenomenon. Yeah? And then Vipassana meditation, which many of you might know about, has been trademarked mindfulness meditation by John Kabat-Zinn. So in Massachusetts Hospital and in the US Department of Health and all that, FDA, all these kind of guys, they are looking at the scientific claims, the scientific benefits, medical benefits of John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness meditation. So some Indian doctors of mine, friends of mine, one day at a party was saying, I've come to this, I've learned this great mindfulness meditation and I can apply it in my practice and I can solve this problem, that problem. And I said, this is an Indian thing. It's called Vipassana. And the guy is having a fight with me because I'm sort of bringing down the greatness of what he's learned by telling him that this is your grandfather's tradition. And he's rejected all that. He's rejected his ancestry and he's now learning this from Westerners and with some nice jargon and some nice new technology, techniques and all that. So, but it's the same principle, and this has now become fashionable. There is an old technique called Yoga Nidra. Yoga Nidra is a state of consciousness where your body is sleeping, but you're alert. So you are awake, very tranquil, there's no thought, very peaceful. It's like very silent witness, very calm, no activity, but witness, awake. And you're observing, you're even observing your breathing, you can be observing your snoring. Yeah, it's a very amazing kind of a thing that you can get into. And there's a Stephen LaBerge in Stanford who studied this for many years and he called it lucid dreaming. And he trademarked lucid dreaming and set up many institutes in different parts of the world to study, do R&D on lucid dreaming. So he's become a very big shot, gets a lot of grants, and he's considered a pioneer. And when he was giving a talk in the 90s about all this, after the talk I went to ask him that, this is an Indian thing. This is Yoga Nidra. So he was very nervous. He said, of course, and he started telling me how he knows this Swami and that place, and he lived in India for 20 years, and he learned it here and there. So I said, why don't you tell that to the audience? And he says, because then I'll never get a grant, it'll be considered some quackery, it'll be, nobody will give me a grant, it will not be considered science, it'll be, so I have to, you should be grateful, I'm doing you a favor because I'm giving the Western stamp of approval, as if we are getting a benefit if somebody takes our things and puts a stamp of their certificate on it. So we have to be grateful for that. So those are some of the episodes I just gave you, which led me into this path of trying to understand and recover and rediscover. So the purpose of this is severalfold. First benefit is that if you can reconnect what the West has found useful and validated in modern scientific terms, if you can reconnect the Indian traditional origin of this, then you can go back to that origin and see what else is there which they did not discover. Because, you know, when somebody comes to your house and takes your art and puts his name on it and hangs it somewhere, maybe there's more art, maybe there's more value, maybe he didn't discover everything. And indeed it is the case that they have a kind of a surface knowledge of something, very useful, and they've gone running to the bank and claiming credit that they've discovered something. But if you go back to that tradition and revive it, there is, you know, 100 times more left to be discovered. So that's one advantage. Second advantage is self-alienated Indians with an inferiority complex. The way you can turn it around is to say that, look, these are all kinds of things that others are appreciating, others are getting value, why are you rejecting this? So this is kind of like reverse psychology, and it works on some people. And third is to make Westerners more self-conscious about their moral responsibility. And I call it, when you harvest the fruit from a tree, you must nurture the roots. You harvest the fruits, you must feed the roots, because you got something out of that tree, you must give something back for the next year's harvest. If you keep harvesting the fruit and don't nurture the roots, let the roots atrophy, the roots will die, and it'll be myopic. Now, one of the things that I've been asked to do by some people in India is a number of people in India are interested in taking these traditional Indian knowledge ideas and finding applications for solving today's problems. So for instance, water is a very serious problem, and I'm glad that the program called Wheels starts with W, which is water. I saw a satellite picture in India where there's a certain camera that can tell you moisture so many feet below the ground. So ponds, artificial water wells and ponds and lakes that had been dug up traditionally, which have been covered up with dirt and which have been used as dumping grounds and, you know, become abused, can be detected by satellite. And there's over 1 million man-made water bodies in India that the satellite images can tell you. I saw one in a detailed map in Tamil Nadu, where what they showed was there's a river, and that river floods. There's 100 hours in the whole year when 90% of the rainfall comes in 100 hours. This is what they discovered. If you do a distribution of rainfall hourly, then if you pick the heaviest rain hours, top 100, which is like 4 days, gives you 90% of the rainfall. This is like high concentration of rainfall. So naturally, there's a flood, and all this water goes waste, and rest of the year there's not enough water. So what these people had done traditionally is when the river would overflow, they had along the river several man-made lakes. And then when these lakes would overflow, they had a second row of lakes. And when the second row of lakes would overflow, they had a third row of lakes. So they have as many as 10 rows of lakes. So each, upon overflowing, there's a little canal, little trench that feeds over to the next level and the next level and the next level. Very, very interesting. And then these fill up, and even till the next year, you've got enough water around for storage purposes. So that's an example of a technology. We're also looking at sustainability. You know, the GDP growth rate based on very intensive use of raw material, energy, very intensive use of fossil fuels, and very intensive use of other raw material is not sustainable. We have 7 billion people on the planet. They are now thinking it will not level off at 12 or something. They thought they would. It may go up to 15 by the end of this century. So where will the raw material, the energy, the capital, the land for growing food, where will that come from with such a high density of population all over the world? I mean, this is a question for a new kind of approach to science and technology. We cannot just go on imagining that, everybody becomes like an American. If 300, 400 million Americans have a certain density of automobiles, per 100 people there's a certain density of automobiles. If 1.2 billion people in India want to achieve the same density of automobiles in 1/3 the amount of land, the density of automobiles will be such that India will become a parking lot. The whole India will be like a big parking lot. I mean, even 20 lanes, 40 lanes roads will not be enough because the sheer population is too much. So obviously, the wrong strategy is to mimic the United States, because India does not have the same situation and must, come up with very different priorities on how you give a good lifestyle. So there is a role for Indian ways of thinking and Indian traditions in order to figure out what's a more balanced and sensible, sustainable, achievable thing. Because if every Indian is craving to become like an American, is measuring with the American as the gold standard, you will have a lot of frustrated people, you will have a lot of disillusioned people, you'll have a lot of haves and have-nots defined based on who's how American, who's how less American. And that criteria and that yardstick will tear society apart, will be violence and all kinds of social unrest. So what you need is something that is achievable on a very large scale, scalable. The American model of prosperity and modernity is not scalable on the world scale. You cannot have the whole world of 15 billion people in the future all living the kind of per capita consumption of paper. We have such a high per capita consumption of so many things in this country. It's just not possible. So there are needs for alternative models and alternative ways of thinking. And I'll close by introducing one more concept which is in this book, and that is the concept called digestion. I introduced the idea of digestion of one civilization into another. It's like a predator, like a tiger eats a deer, and then the deer vanishes. There's no more deer left because the tiger breaks down the deer's DNA into little parts, and then all that is reassembled, all that is used as raw material, and in the tiger's body it's reassembled into tiger's DNA. And so the tiger has skin and blood and flesh and whatever, all with tiger DNA in it. There's no more deer DNA left. So that is what happens when somebody gets digested. What was considered undesirable about the deer is either left out, like skin and teeth, they're not taken in, or if they're taken in, they're excreted as waste because they're of no use. Now if you take this kind of model, civilizations have been digested in the past. The Native Americans were digested. Many useful things were taken from them, but the Native Americans perished and they just preserved in museums, and you can go there and glorify how great they were, but they're not a living, thriving civilization today. Pre-Christian pagans in Greece and Rome and across Europe were persecuted. A lot of things were taken, like the Christmas tree and the mother child and the Easter, and a whole lot of symbols and rituals, and all these ideas were taken. What was considered useful, what was interesting, was adopted, but the pagans themselves were put away. So this has happened to Egyptians, this has happened to African cultures, and today Tibet is being digested into China. Same way, Tibet is being digested. In another generation or two, it will be a tourist attraction, there will be nice museums, there will be no living, thriving Tibetans. The only thing that's prevented them from finishing off the job is because there's a whole lot of Tibetan diaspora outside the Chinese control. Because if there weren't the Tibetan diaspora outside of China, they would have finished it off by now. So the digestion of a civilization by a stronger civilization has been happening a lot. And my concern is that if Indian knowledge keeps getting broken down by the predator, by the neuroscientists, by the cognitive scientists, by the people who want the patents, who don't want to acknowledge the source because they want to eliminate that trace, who want to claim it's theirs. This digestion of Indian knowledge and Indian traditions into what I call Western universalism will basically result in the destruction of a civilization. So it will not be a living civilization, it will just be sitting in museums for scholars. And the antidote to being digested is to understand what's distinct and different about us that we must preserve. What is it that is of use It's not just for nostalgia kind of a thing. What is it that's useful today, that is distinct about our civilization, that's the signature of our civilization, that's the DNA of our civilization, that we must understand, and then we must preserve it as something we cannot negotiate away. We cannot just give this up. And this book, Being Different, has identified 4 major areas of what these differences are. I don't have time to get into all that, but there's a chapter on each one of those 4. So chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5, each of them takes one major area of difference and explains it in detail. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take questions.
You mentioned just a minute ago, when you talked about digestion, the idea of a stronger civilization absorbing in some shape or form the quote-unquote, you didn't use the word weaker, but I take it as implied. So that kind of brings us to the idea of Darwinism, the idea that civilizations can also be subject to the same notion, same paradigm of Darwinism. So for instance, at a very trivial level, if you say Apple didn't invent anything, those constituent technologies were already there, Apple just came along at the right time, tablet computers have been around, but it took a particular time, set of circumstances, and a place for these constituent technologies to be brought together in order to be what it is today, what the tablet is today, right? So that's a very trivial example of a broader concept of...
Can you get to the question now?
So where I'm going with this is it our ego that wants us to go back to a past glory, or...
I'll answer that.
Yeah, let me stop there.
Sure, I'll answer that. So I already answered it by saying that the benefits of being non-digestible are as follows. First, the original tradition may have more to offer than has been taken. So the guy who came up with Yoga Nidra can do many, many more things than just what one Westerner from Stanford went and learned and patented. So he may have taken a superficial understanding, and the problem is not the borrowing. The problem is that the erasing the source makes the source obscure. It loses its continuity of further development. So the borrowing is in an incomplete borrowing. It's not complete enough because it's done in haste. So the original source sort of loses out, whereas it has a lot more to offer. It's sort of like saying we'll actually take the goodies out of this research lab, but we'll shut down the lab. So I'm saying you take the goodies, but don't shut down the lab. Let the lab also continue developing new enhancements. So if the West were to take ideas out of India and credit them properly, and the Indians were to nurture these systems, these ancient systems, then they would keep bringing about more enhancements. So it's not for ego. It's sort of like, why don't you want to shut down someone's lab? Is it for the ego? Well, it's because the lab is useful. The lab has more things to discover. So I would say that is the primary reason, is that you should borrow cross cultures without destroying and without erasing the other side. That's the idea for doing this. And you know, when the West borrows from Greece, a lot of Western thought came out of Greece. We know that. The Greek sources are not erased. It's fashionable to quote Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, but it is not fashionable to quote Abhinav Gupta or Bhartrhari or Patanjali or Panini, from where a lot of ideas came. So why is it that when the West absorbs something out of Greece, it is kept alive? Students in universities study Greek thought, but when the West absorbs ideas out of Indian civilization, those original sources are not taught. They are considered to be obsolete or finished off. It's that, what I like is a level playing field. That's all.
A more sophisticated patent office.
I have two questions. One, the discussion you are advancing here seems purely academic to me, on the basis of Hegelian concept of dialectics in ideas. Ideas flow, and you are advancing one of the ideas in just juxtaposition the other ideas, number one. Number two, it seems to me that the globalization of the Western culture that is apparent today, how do you subscribe that it may be challenged, and what will be the system which will be able to challenge?
Well, first of all, the West has many Westerners challenging itself. West is very self-critical. Some of the people I mentioned who are cutting-edge neuroscientists, some of the people who are looking at environmentalist models, some of the people who are looking at social models for aging, are in fact looking at other civilizations. So it is not that necessarily that Indians are challenging the old West and replacing it with some Indian ideas. Westerners are challenging their own orthodox, their own traditional West, and bringing in Indian ideas. So the West is already doing that job. So the question is whether Indians are even aware of this. So to some extent it is to make Indians aware that your civilization you don't have to give up, because in fact even the West is adopting some of those methods. There's something called the pizza effect. A pizza effect is that a culture does not respect itself until Americans turn it into Pizza Hut and make it world famous, and then the guys in the villages in Italy think pizza is a great thing because now it's become famous. So this is called pizza effect because the prestige of your pizza comes back via Pizza Hut. But previously you didn't think it's that great. So there is a pizza effect going on with Westerners adopting Indian culture and Indian ideas and making it very prominent, and then Indians saying, wow, you know, this must be cool because we're not after all that bad because Westerners are liking it, so maybe we're okay. So in a sense I'm also utilizing the pizza effect, in a sense. In 2000, IIT Kharagpur celebrated their 50th anniversary. So my foundation received a grant request to fund conferences. And among the list of conferences, the one that attracted my attention most was called Mind Science. So I said, I'm interested in funding Mind Science, but I'd like to know what's the content of this conference going to be. And they showed me a plan of who will speak and what they'll speak on. And it was all Western models of mind, Western theories of mind. I didn't see any Panini, Patanjali, I didn't see any Buddhist thought, I didn't see any of the great meditation systems, I didn't see any of that. So I wrote to them that I will fund it, but you should have one panel on Indian models of mind. I got this very nasty email which I kept with me, which said we are not chauvinists, we don't have ego, we are scientific people, we are secular, this kind of stuff. So I got hold of 5 white Western friends and said, you go and talk about Indian civilization. Yeah? One's a Buddhist and he's been a follower of Dalai Lama and he's great at Columbia University. One is a scholar of Patanjali in Cambridge. One is practice Kundalini and Tantra in California. One is in New York in a hospital and he's a Sri Aurobindo follower and they're following all these neurological techniques and he's a Sri Aurobindo follower, like that. So I said, now's your chance to nurture the roots. You've been harvesting the fruits, now your chance to nurture the roots. So I want you to write a proposal and explain, do not give up the original Sanskrit terms, use the original terms, mention who initiated you, who was your guru, where did you practice, how did you learn it, acknowledge all the history of how you got this idea, and then explain how you are teaching it in the West, what are the benefits, why are the Westerners learning this, what are they doing with it. So I got these 5 guys' proposals and I sent it to IIT Kharagpur. Like that they accepted it, because now Westerners are saying it. Okay, so all your question about is it ego and all that and is it viable, I'm answering you that this is how I did it. This is the pizza effect. And when these guys went to IIT Kharagpur, they got standing ovations. And they got so many invites from Kerala and from Pondicherry and from Chennai and Delhi University to talk about these Indian models. And I kept funding it for 7-8 years. I funded a team of people. First it was Westerners, and then we got young Indian scholars to join them. And this started a mobilization on Indian psychology. A new discipline was born. I just gave a talk in January in Delhi University. They brought a large number of people to do a seminar on Indian psychology. I'm told there's about 150 to 200 practicing professional researchers and academicians and scholars of psychology in India who call themselves, Indian psychologists, in the sense that it's not a Western model of mind, but an Indian model of mind. So I have created, or I'm one of many who have worked together to create a new discipline called Indian Approaches to Mind and Psychology. And it's using Westerners to bring this back to India and to tell them that this is where we got it from.
Just ask a question, follow up on that. You keep referring to Indians, philosophy, etc. But in the 40 years since I've lived here in the US, I've been back to India many times and find deep cultural differences between different regions of India. Are you really referring to Hindu philosophy as opposed to Indian philosophy?
Well, I'm referring to classical India, which includes Buddhism. It includes Charvakas. Charvakas were didn't believe in a god or something, but they were a scientific kind of mind. I'm looking at the people who built the Harappan civilization, who were metallurgists. In fact, the people who were metallurgists and textile type of people, the relationship to what was their spiritual tradition is not very clear. It's not even clear who they were, but they were Indians. So it's not clear if the people who discovered the mathematics were what was their philosophical bent of mind, but they were scientists. We tend to think that Sanskrit is a language of Hindus, but I would like to tell you this: the vast majority, if you were to look at a bibliography of all known Sanskrit texts, the vast majority of Sanskrit texts are science, poetry, stories, political thought, statecraft, governance. They are not religious texts. There is this view that to study Sanskrit you got to be a Hindu, but there is a huge amount of non-religious, non-spiritual Sanskrit knowledge. So knowledge is a bigger space than the dimension which is nowadays called Hinduism. So at that time there wasn't that word even. There was a word Dharma, and then there was even bigger than Dharma is knowledge.
The term Sanatan?
Sanatan Dharma was a term, but I'm saying that there's even bigger than Sanatan Dharma is knowledge, because this knowledge is also about metallurgy, it's all about medicine, it's also about looking after plants and how to have statecraft and things of that sort. So the idea, the people who did water harvesting, it is a very I started my talk by emphasizing the material, practical, worldly approach to knowledge, because I didn't want to found it on and base my whole talk and discussion on a spiritual tradition, which would take me in that direction. But to not go in that direction, I in fact emphasize, and our 20-volume series, we're not talking religion at all. 20-volume series, when we talk the history of steel building or making cities or whatever, we do not even know what their traditional spiritual knowledge was of those workers, because it's not very clear.
Basically, it's very interesting, your thought process, and I might call it wisdom, Indian wisdom of the ages. Have you thought about this connection that you have in mind and what Gandhi talked about? Self-purification, self-development, and how to develop the community, and then end up with the Swaraj.
Absolutely.
This is a beautiful way. He was the most modern person.
Yes.
He thought about how to use Indian wisdom.
Yes. I really like that you brought this up.
Can you make that connection?
Yes.
A lot of people misses that connection.
In fact, in this book, it begins with Gandhi, ends with Gandhi. In this book. Okay? This idea of being different, I say the quintessential personality who lived being different is Gandhi. Because Gandhi never compromised his style, his dress, how he would eat. He took his goat to Buckingham Palace because when he went to England, because this is his lifestyle, this is what he will eat and what he will drink, and he's not trying to impress them and be like them. He was not interested in being accepted by the British on the British terms, but on his own terms. He did not translate the Indian terms. He had Swadharma, and he had Satyagraha, and he has Swaraj, and they kept asking what is all this, and he would keep saying that this is not translatable. So my chapter 5 is called non-translatables, which means the things which a civilization has, and therefore because the civilization has a certain experience, it has a word for it, and another civilization might not have a word for it. They might not have a word for yoga because they didn't have yoga. So if you translate yoga as exercise or gymnastics or prayer, it is not the right thing. So when asked what is the satyagraha, when the British judge asked him what is the satyagraha, he keeps using the word satyagraha and explaining what he is doing, but he doesn't replace it with some simple word. And when the judge says, okay, then why are you doing it? He says it will give us Swaraj. So he gives another word like that. you see, this is a very Gandhi is a quintessential, non-translatable, non-digestible, really kind of a solid guy from our soil. That's a very good, I didn't think of reminding, but I have a lot written on Gandhi in this book.
I have a second question. Can you now translate that, which I would call is a very strong degeneration of a society in India today?
Yes, I think
about what is happening in the so-called Delhi and all those various layers.
Yes.
The real people which Gandhi has in mind are not being served.
Yeah, I think there's many issues going on. There is also a huge kind of degenerate materialism. People tell me that now we'll be solving these problems with all the money, but I think that money is also kind of corrupting the character of people. So there is a new kind of elitism, not that old-fashioned elitism, but a new kind of elitism. Who's got the BMW, who's got a US trip stamped on his passport and got a Swiss account and all those kind of things. There's corruption. There is selfishness. So this is not this kind of a renaissance of India is not a kind of a traditional Indian kind of idea of renaissance. This is not Indian values. This is all part of the mimicry of a very hedonistic lifestyle. Now, I keep telling people in my lectures in India, why don't you copy the good things from the Americans? Because Americans got a lot of good things. You should be, copying the work ethic. You should be copying all kinds of good stuff that the Americans have, but you are copying all the bad things. The smoking, for example. The smoking industry is declining in this country. Philip Morris, all these guys, because people are losing smoking. So guess where is the export market? Asia. Asia is the fastest growing cigarette market, liquor market. It's a huge growing. These Scotch guys are really delighted. Now there's a Scotch whiskey going up like crazy. So I think you're absolutely right. The renaissance of India is a kind of materialistic, hedonistic approach and not necessarily sustainable. So I'm not arguing from a nostalgia point of view. I'm arguing, is it practical to achieve it? Or will you create more tension because there'll be haves and have-nots? There's such a huge concentration of power which is getting worse. And there's farmer suicides, while there's, we measure how many billionaires we got, and all these magazines and newspapers are really excited we got all these billionaires. But I'm more concerned that there's so many lakhs of farmer suicides. And that is the area that I'm more interested in figuring out.
Question in the back. I listened to some very nice conversation about why the governance of China is very stable, although it's not a democracy. And the speaker introduced the term of civilization nation. And I am wondering that the evidence you bring from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, that there is no central large ruler and each of the small cities was self-sufficient, which is also a Gandhian philosophy, is that at contradiction with the current democratic rule procedure, and if the two can reconcile?
Well, this is a beautiful question. In fact, one of the things I'm researching with the help of what this book is doing is opening doors and planting seeds in many disciplines. So I'm also working with social scientists and people in these areas, political scientists, to see if this very central power approach that we got from the British had this central power approach to control Indians. So they needed, the district collector was a tax extortionist guy. We still use the word district collector. I mean, that's a colonial, he should be serving the people rather than a collector. No? So this mindset of a whole hierarchy with a very centralized Delhi as sort of the head of an empire, this needs to be questioned. Whether this is this is the right ethos of the average person. The average person in India, if he has to get justice, he has to represent his case in a very westernized style of law. He has to get himself attorney, lawyer. If a person in a village, I did a lot of work in Nagapattinam after the tsunami. We built a youth hostel, and so I spent months there living with the fishermen and spending actually living and eating and being with them. I found that when they needed something from the government, they had to go through an NGO, which was a bunch of well-educated, in the Western sense, modern Indians, westernized Indians. They had to interface through these NGOs to get service from their own government. So they're alienated in their own country. And this self-alienation is causing a lot of problems, I would think. So we need to figure out, is this central parliament, very central system of government viable for India? Or does there have to be a dilution of the federal system, and not only down to states, but even further down to
It's kind of
districts?
interesting because the concept of India as we know it today was actually introduced by the British.
Yes.
Because up until the British came in, India was ruled by several hundred princedoms or smaller kingdoms. So when you talk about India, which India are you referring to? The pre-colonial India, or going back 1,000 years, the Harappan India, or the modern India?
See, there's different answers depending on whether you're talking about culture and civilization and knowledge systems, in which case there has been continuity. A lot of these knowledge systems are still alive and well, like classical Indian dance, and all the messages it gives you is still alive. And the storytelling is still alive. That is one India. Or are you talking about governance? Now, if you're talking about governance, there has been India is a recent construction based on British style of governance replaced with a parliament democracy copied mainly from Britain and a few other places, a hodgepodge of constitutions put together. So India as a political entity is a recent construction. But India as a civilizational entity is not a recent construction. It's a very old construction. And the two are at odds. The conflict between Bharat and India, if you want to call it like that. There is a conflict. The conflict is that the civilization has a certain set of ethos, certain social ideas, certain ways of governance, very decentralized, how you treat people. There's a whole value system. And now this imported knowledge system for politics and governance and statecraft is actually at odds with it. So there is an India versus India clash going on today. And I think this is something people don't want to talk about.
Question. You referred to knowledge transfer, and I believe that knowledge transfer has been happening on a global scale for thousands of years. I mean, back in the days of Marco Polo and all the other people who transferred knowledge. So the good things got transferred, meaning that materialistic things got transferred. And even today I'm seeing that, take China as an example, that when they take a contract from the West to manufacture something, and they are very well known for their manufacturing capabilities, that not only do they ask for the manufacturing to be done in China, but also the IP, the intellectual capital that goes into making something. So they are capturing all of that. But what my view is that it's only happening at an accelerated pace today relative to what it was happening 4,000 years ago. So my question to you is, would you project that in the future, and I don't know whether future is 50 years, 100 years or whatever, that there, just like water finds its own level, that intellectual property also will find its own level, and that we'll all be happily manufacturing and training and doing things in our own way. Therefore, there will be no need for people to have BMWs and Mercedes only, but can make do with walking and bicycles and nano cities.
Yeah, I think that I hope that's the outcome in the future, that there is not one monolithic knowledge system, one monolithic technology which says BMW is the right lifestyle, but many, many lifestyles. My concern is actually not over knowledge transfer. I think knowledge transfer has been happening for 4,000 or 5,000 years or longer. Very slow, the equivalent of an internet with people traveling and land route, ocean route, all that stuff, knowledge going back and forth. And that's wonderful and beautiful. But you see, until recently, the people did not have the means to project power far away and control and oppress and obliterate somebody's native way of life. That wasn't the case. So while knowledge was transferring, when India transferred a huge amount of knowledge with traveling Buddhists to China and Japan, and it was not just religion, it was agriculture, linguistics, a lot of the alphabet in the Japanese, they'll tell you, come from the Sanskrit, and a lot of these martial arts came from India. So it's not about religion, but a lot of other cultural things and scientific knowledge and so on also transferred back and forth. Rice came from China, a lot of agricultural things came from India there. The difference is that in those days, there was no attempt by an Indian ruler to impose a governor there, collect taxes from those guys, change their name, change their sense of history, to make them part of our idea of history and deny them their own continuity with their ancestry. There was no tampering with their sense of identity. There was no tampering with their sense of self-esteem and their sense of autonomy and integrity. So you had peer-to-peer knowledge transfer, peer-to-peer, equals. It was not a kind of a head with a subordinate. It was not master-slave knowledge transfer. I think that this is a more recent thing in an international arena, because the power of the West in the colonial era became so dominant that for the first time here was a civilization able to and willing to and determined to spread its knowledge and obliterate other knowledge systems because they were considered a competitor or considered a threat. So where we are going to go in the future is there will be a multipolar knowledge system. I think China is assimilating all this IP that it's getting, but China is also leading in patents, in research, and we should not underestimate and think of Chinese as just a bunch of copycats, because I think very smart people. And it is characteristic of Americans to underestimate. People underestimate the Japanese auto industry. I used to live in Detroit, and my friends worked in all the car companies. They said, "Nay, you don't realize, Japanese, they're no good. They because they're in cheap labor, they're doing it." And then 2-3 years later, they would say that certain things their manufacturing is better, but because they're small hands, they're not well fed, it's tough guys like us. So they can get and do fine things because they're small hands. It was all this chauvinistic stuff. And the same guys, were out of work, these guys in Detroit, because Japanese took them to lunch, So do not underestimate what the Chinese will do in terms of innovating new technology. And I think it will be a more multipolar world of knowledge systems, and there will be many traditional knowledges of various places, including India, which will revive. I mean, I'm glad to tell you that there are people working in areas like health and medicine who are coming up with some very interesting breakthroughs using Indian knowledge systems. Not only people in India, but Westerners also are very interested in looking at Indian medical ideas and coming up with new ideas. So there will be a multipolar competing knowledge systems, and what I'm trying to encourage is that we are to play the game. We are to also be part of that.
Yeah, I was wondering, in your studies, have you found whether any of the original Indian ideas were based on elements drawn from other civilizations prior, that are not Western, that are not Chinese, that are none of the ones that you mentioned, but there are other things that Indians drew from and built on that we don't know about? Yeah,
I think that's, you keep going further and further back in history, and you find that there's a lot of resemblance of symbols mentioned in Indian texts and found in Indian art that you'll also find in Europe, and you'll find in Africa, and you'll find in Middle East. And people argue and quibble, where did it come from and how did it travel? We don't quite know. And being a scientist by training, I'm skeptical to accept any view until it's confirmed. So I believe that let there be many theories. I don't believe that we should stop one theory because it could be politically motivated. I think people should all be able to talk, and then we need evidence. So where is the origin of ideas in prehistory, what the Westerners call prehistory because their recorded history starts at a certain time, is a very fascinating question. And I reject these theories of history that have come up since Hegel's time, which privilege the West and make it the template of world history. Everybody has to follow their trajectory. I reject that. And so I think the whole study of history is now opened up and up for grabs, and there will be probably many new breakthroughs. People found Dwarka off the coast of Gujarat, and now they're looking for submarines to go down, but they know that there are artifacts that exist there. And when the tsunami happened, the 1 or 2 kilometers, the ocean went back before it came again. And so people have pictures of 2 kilometers of beach, and many archaeological sites were exposed. And some of them are still there. I went and took pictures of that. Some very old prehistoric sites, Mahabalipuram, which had been under the ocean. But there were myths and stories. There were stories that when the Chinese ships used to come, they used to see 7 temples with the fire lit on the top, like lighthouses, 7 of them. And so what we now have as the Mahabalipuram temple is 1. So the local tour guide says that the other 6 are because the ocean level has gone up or whatever, they sank into the ocean. And nobody really believed whether it's true or not. But when the tsunami happened, a couple of those others also got exposed. So some of this prehistoric stuff, gradually starts coming out. And so every time this comes out, people have to revise their idea of history quite seriously. So this is kind of a fascinating area for
talk about preservation of cultures and making it indigestible. The Gandhis are gone. What you are saying, my father told me long time ago. And when we go, we pass on. Who is to preserve this, and will we be totally taken off? Because we are basically hating the West. All our kids are. The wealth, they're making all the IT wealth. What are they spending on? Booze, all bad habits. So the core family values, preserving a culture, how do we practically think we are going to convey to our youngsters to...
Sure, that's a good question. Let me answer that question. So first of all, I don't think that, I'm sorry if I miscommunicated, but I didn't intend to say that there's a partition between spirituality and material. What I meant to say is, we cannot dismiss Indian tradition as spiritual only, mystical only. It also has a very strong material dimension. Both dimensions are there, and not everybody is one or the other. Not everybody is a sannyasi or expected to be one. There's also Vaishyas who are commercial traders and manufacturers and so on. So in our tradition there is a purusharth for wealth creation, for materialism. There's a purusharth for that. So it is a legitimate, to pursue desires and pursue within ethical norms, not in an unethical way, and to pursue material advancement and wealth accumulation is also considered a valid pursuit in our tradition. So this doesn't mean that there's a bifurcation and opposition between the two, because they're both accepted. Now, as far as the issue you raised, which is very concerning to me also, that a guy like me writes this book and intellectuals read it. What's behind your question, if I'm understanding correctly, is how do we make a real world impact? Because what you're saying is, in the real world things are getting worse. Okay, and some intellectual sitting somewhere and writing books and talking, how will it make an impact? So what one guy can do is all I can do. I am basically working with people who are social scientists, people who are involved in NGOs, people who are involved in education. I addressed the International Conference on Education in Delhi, where several hundred educators came, and I gave them a seminar on some of these issues. And what is interesting to me is that India is accelerating in both sides, both ways, opposite ways. There is a huge renaissance of the tradition. There is a renaissance of tradition. And there is a renaissance that there are educators very concerned about bringing back traditional ideas through education. There's a lot of interest on the part of some wealthy industrialists to fund these kind of projects. I get called and say people want to know, okay, how do we fund this? How do we train 100 people to go around talking like you? People asking me, can you run an academy and train youth to be going around spreading these ideas among young people? And I get more invites to come and talk to young people in colleges than I'm able to accept, because I don't have the energy to go and do so much. So certainly this tells me that the interest is there. And 5-10 years ago the IITs were not as interested in these kind of things, but today every IIT wants a whole workshop and a whole seminar. So somewhere the doors are opening. But at the other side, we're also becoming more hedonistic. The society is going their way. I don't know which is a faster trend. And depends on, if you're in Delhi, where my relatives are, and I go and spend a lot of time there, the situation is pretty bad from this point of view. Because everybody is into the latest single malt. They want to know whether you got this particular kind which is so many years old. And you know, this is the kind of thing, they're all into that, you know, they're all into that. And then when I leave Delhi, I find that in other towns, other state capitals and smaller towns, I find there's a huge desire to sort of respect our tradition. And there's a big dichotomy between the English press and the local language press. If you take, one of the things I'm doing is translating these books into other languages. Because I find that the people who read those languages are still sort of connected to the roots. So there is two Indias in that.
Here is that there used to be Ganarajyas in India, Ganarajya, which is the ultimate form of... Ultimate form of democracy.
Yeah.
Ganarajyas.
People's.
I'm not sure if Kapil Vastu and Richway and all those people were like that, but there is some evidence. And then you mentioned about Mohenjo-daro and all that, where it is not centrally controlled like kings, but it is more like a Ganarajya type of situation. That will lead us to believe that the democracy actually was in existence in India even long before the Greek form of democracy.
Yes.
So that's one thing. And the other thing is there is a lot of, you mentioned scientific evidence, there is a lot of evidence about Saraswati being discovered, like radioisotope dating in Jaisalmer area and of course the ISRO things and stuff like that.
Yes.
And the theory of, I guess it used to be called Aryan invasion theory, and then Aryan migration theory.
They're no good.
This continues. And then the new theory of out of India theory.
That's correct.
So do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, if you take the book which was before being different, the book which is in yellow called Breaking India, there's a whole lot on the evidence on the history of how the Aryan-Dravidian divide was fabricated, who fabricated it, why they fabricated it, and all kinds of original text and evidence I'm showing you, and what is false about it based on all kinds of new evidence, including DNA evidence. So if you're interested, there's a lot of section on that written about it. As far as democracy is concerned, there are such claims. There are claims that are accepted that there are certain kingdoms which had something sort of like a democracy. There are some inscriptions where a certain group of people come and they vote, and you need this many votes to decide who's going to be the next guy and all that. So it certainly seems to have existed, and I don't know on what scale it existed and for what period of time it might have lasted.
There is an example of Vaishali. Vaishali was a republic, and Buddha, Buddha came to Vaishali after enlightenment.
Yes.
So that means it gave 500 BC.
At least, and it may have lasted even before that. So what we don't know is how pervasive it was beyond a few places, and why it went away. What was the cause it went away? And what would it take to revive some of these things? Because what we do know that this panchayat system and this decentralized village self-sufficiency has been around, and maybe one of the solutions to, like in the United States, they're saying buy local. That's a Gandhian idea. Buy local fruit and produce, because it is not manufactured and kept in cold storage 1,000 miles away and harvested a month ago or a year ago, but it is buy local. Many people participate in these local co-ops. I don't know if you have them here or not, organic farming co-ops. Now, I think there's a return to some of these things coming. The milkman went away. The milkman is a guy in this country who used to come, 2 generations back and give you the milk from local cows. And it was not that the cows are somewhere 1,000 miles away and, it's all manufacturing in like a factory environment. And so some of these ideas for health trees, people are finding the health factor is bringing a return to some of these traditional things.
The book is one of the media. I'm going to talk about the media actually. The book is one of the media that's for intellectual only. And general or mass public is oriented or moved by film industry these days. All Hollywood is all movies or anything, even sitcoms or Passage to India or Doomed to
Temple of Doom to India or whatever, even last week's Oscar, they are all derogatory to India. So,
Question
but I'm
bolo,
talking,
question
is, I will talk anything about the media.
Yeah. So.
Recent, I mean, latest actually
No, let me give you my views on this whole issue. I think that there is multiple points of intervention, not one point of intervention.
Media, I'm talking media.
No, but I'm saying that to change society, there's multiple points of intervention. There is the education system, which is very important. You can't say it's only media. K through 12, school textbooks, teacher training is a very big force. I mean, it has a huge influence. Media has a huge influence. Policy making has an influence. Because if the policy makers are allocating resources for a certain kind of vision, they are neglecting resources for a different kind of vision, you can't say it has no effect. You can't say that let's ignore the mindset of the policy makers and the mindset of the educators and just make some Bollywood movies and we'll solve the problem. It's not like that. So there are multiple points of intervention and multiple force multipliers, leverages, many kinds. And media is one of them. So I'm clearly aware of that. I would love to have people on the television, because television is also full of a lot of nonsense, not just Bollywood movies, but also television, which is...
Even some Indian movies are derogatory to India.
Of course, not only some, but a large number of them.
Right.
I mean, it's fashionable. It is quite fashionable to do that. So, the problem is definitely there, and I fully agree with you, there's a problem.
Have you seen any parallel in your study of history, whether it's Indian or otherwise, where media or information has been controlled by a few sources, and has it ever happened?
See, the thing is that the technology was only recent for this kind of control. But what happened in traditional India is there were two levels. There is a Shastrik Parampara, which is sort of, Brahmins and knowledge of learned people being transmitted to other learned people. And there is Lok Parampara, which is the whole Puranas, Itihas, the dance, the music, the pop culture. The pop culture was very egalitarian and very adaptive and flexible and very pervasive, and did not get controlled by authorities, because a person in a village could do their own Ram Leela, their own interpretation of what they felt was, this was pervasive. So the recent technology has created the opportunity to standardize, and when you can standardize, then you can also control that standard. So this is a very recent thing. Turning Ram Leela from a local production. When I was a kid, our neighborhood did Ram Leela. We spent 2-3 months, everybody was in it. And so it was kind of like ours, and then some other place 5 kilometers away did a different version of Ram Leela, and they had their own idea. And this is how it was in Delhi. I'm talking about a place like Delhi. I don't see any Ram Leela going on in Delhi, because you can get a DVD and watch it. What that does is, you standardized rather than adaptability, rather than localization and customization and tailoring it, and keeping it moving with the times and shifting it a little bit to modulate the story for what was required or what was interesting. It's become like a standardized canon. The canonization of Indian texts is a recent thing, and you find this is a very big difference with Western traditions, because Western traditions, thinking that God came and gave a unique message at a unique point in time to somebody, therefore we must record and keep it absolutely standard, never let a word be changed. That idea of fossilizing, fixing dogma is in the Western traditions, but not so solid in the Indian traditions. Because while the Shruti, like Vedas, are recited impeccably and exactly the same way for thousands of years, but as far as the Itihas is concerned, as far as the Puranas are concerned, they're always adaptable. As far as the Natashastra as a method of enhancing yourself is concerned, it's highly adaptable. As far as the way you play your ragas, it's improvised. So there is a huge improvisational dimension of Indian culture, which prevented it from being controlled by some authority. That layer is very strong. It's still strong, actually.
Nari had an interesting question for you.
Good. I need an interesting question. Finally, we want to get an interesting question.
Have you thought about rewriting your books in verse? Because if there were anything that were a core Indian value that's been lost, it's the oral tradition that distinguished us most from the West. we suffer from it because we don't have so many printed records, half our palm leaves are gone. But what sustained the transmission of knowledge through the millennia was the notion of poetry and rhyme and so on, whether in Sanskrit or anything else.
Yes.
So if you want to make a good point, you should hire somebody to rewrite your 9 volumes in verse.
Good, so you come and help me do that. See the interesting thing is, I go to 10 Indians and they give me 20 lifetimes worth of work to do. Not one of them is going to come in and do one little thing on his own. If I say you don't give me ideas, give me plans where you can help, then they're all gone, run away. I have on my website how to help, because I keep getting ideas of helping, and I've given 5 ways of helping, with knowledge, with resources, with time, with this, with that, whatever. And each one of them says, give me a proposal with this written down and what you can do. Otherwise, if I were to make a list, I could give you a 3-day seminar on all the things I would love to do. And I would like to get help in. I would like to write the 50-page monographs that are easy to read. I would like to translate into 20 languages. I would like to make DVDs. I would like to make motion pictures. I would like to own I would like you to buy out CNN and give it to me so I can run it. I would like you to put me in the White House so that I can appoint a cabinet and allocate resources. I would like to run the United Nations and change it. I would love to rewrite all the school textbooks. I could go on telling you all the things I would love to do. And it is not like I don't have ideas and I'm not imaginative, but the point is that I am able to do so much. And I welcome people to come and help me do whatever those things are. I mean, I would love to have more people help me.
I
just wanted to ask you, Rajivji, that you had given some examples of individuals who took some Indian concepts or knowledge and then kind of appropriated it, and without quoting the source, and then later the source was obliterated. Now, how does this relate to the mass digestion of a civilization? Like individuals doing that? And
very good. Now this is a very astute question, because Bhavana has been involved in a lot of these things and discussions for a very long time. Digestion is at 3 levels, and I'm writing a whole series of books on that. One is individual journey. So some guy goes and he digests things for himself, creates a patent, and he comes up with makes a lot of money, becomes famous. That's an individual digestion. Second level of digestion is a whole discipline or a school of thought transforming with digested knowledge. So like modern linguistics in the West. Modern linguistics in the West is born out of in the 1800s, the study of Panini in Germany, England and France for 75 years. And you look at the history of linguistics, there was linguistics, but very radically upgraded and enhanced through the study of Sanskrit. So that's an example of a whole discipline being transformed, and now we are seeing that in neuroscience and cognitive science and things of that sort, where a whole discipline is being transformed. That is not individual journey, but a whole collection of people, their cumulative effect has a certain transfer of knowledge going on. That's the second level. And the third level is at the level of the whole civilization, where the entire civilization repositions itself by assimilating and adopting and borrowing and whatever, digesting things from a whole lot of others. Like the pagans are gone and the Native American civilization is gone. And I feel that in another generation the Tibetan civilization will be gone. So those are not individual digestion by one guy here, one guy there. It's a kind of the ultimate effect on the whole civilizational level is the digestion of something by something else. So there are these different levels. And my book is organized, in fact, into individual journeys, collective journeys of a school of thought, and the whole civilization's journey.
So actually, let me use the prerogative of asking you the last question and then hand it off to Sant. So, as a last question, what makes America great is that this is a melting pot, and I think what I have observed in India is that India has never really been a melting pot. So when you travel from Kashmir to Kerala, you see significant differences between people. So if you look around this room, most of us are first generation Americans, if you will, or immigrants. And there are a few people here who might be our children. What is your message to the next generation of Indians living in this country? Do you cling on to your old Indian heritage, or do you assimilate, and how do you do that?
Well, they are not mutually exclusive. You have a very proud, if you live in New York, you'll see Irish Day Parade, you'll see, Italian Day Parade, and you'll see, there's Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Hispanic Americans, Jewish Americans, Japanese Americans, Chinese Day Parade. So there's a misnomer that to be fully American, you have to stop being who you are, and because as long as you are identifying with a certain civilization and a certain land of origin, then you are somehow you have to have an inferiority complex, and you have to give that up in order to be fully American. I don't think that is the case at all. In fact, I find that Americans respect you more if you have a clear sense of identity and are able to articulate it with mutual respect. Not with chauvinism and not knocking down someone else, but with mutual respect. If you can say, this is my background, this is my civilization. Americans are so proud. You meet Americans, they'll say, I'm Episcopalian, my parents came from England, or we came from Germany. They're so proud of that. So America, because it's a melting, I think more than a melting pot, it's a salad bowl where the different identities have preserved themselves in large measure. You see in Pennsylvania, it's Dutch country. It's a Dutch country. You go to Louisiana, it's French country. So hundreds of years later, they've still preserved a certain character, and they're very proud of it. So far, the predominant cultures that represented the tapestry of America were from different parts of Europe. The non-European, Hispanic, Chinese, Indian, Japanese, sort of more recent phenomenon. But if you look at the history of immigration in America, it's all about new groups coming, negotiating who they are, their sense of identity with the American mainstream, and defining that we are American, we want all the rights, we are absolutely equal, we are patriotic as can be, but there is this distinctiveness about us. And this is what makes you an American, a complete American, is when you can be different and be American at the same time, and not have any complex or any tension between the two.
Very well. Thank you very much.
I'm here to convey our vote of thanks. I'm a proud IITian. Rajiv is my guest. And what I feel Rajiv has done, which is very remarkable and rather unique, is given us a lot of things to think about. You may disagree, you may agree, but he has come up with a line of thinking and a thought process. It forces you to examine some of the questions, some of the issues that were confusing to us. So the purpose is not here to say he's right or wrong. He absolutely invites criticism and debate. And if you look at his book, please, I invite you to get his book. He has a blog. There are many ways you can help. He has a blog that you can subscribe to. You can help. Of course, as he mentioned earlier, if there are things that you want to contribute towards this topic, think about it and be on his blog and contribute. So, and he is writing a series of books, and he's always looking for help, people who can do some serious work. Thank you very much. This is Friday evening, and there was rain outside, but you're all here. Greatly appreciate it. And finally, I would like to, Rajiv, I would like to offer you a small token of gift from IIT Alumni Association, capital IIT. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure for inviting me.
This is a necktie designed for IITians for the 50th anniversary.
Fantastic. Then I will wear one next time.
Please do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, not at all. I wasn't trying to.
Right.